What is hydroxychloroquine? Hydroxychloroquine is a derivative of chloroquine, one of the first malarial drugs invented. Chloroquine was based off of a drug called quinine. Quinine is also credited as the first chemical compound used to treat an infectious disease. Quinine was initially ground from the bark of a cinchona tree. It was given to settlers from Spain by Indians near Peru in the 1600s and brought to the Western world as a cure for malaria. Eventually, Jesuit priests traveled the world with cinchona bark, so much so that it was commonly known as Jesuit's bark. In 1751, the Spanish crown took control of all the sources of quinine, restricting access as a new form of scientific-based imperialism. At the beginning of the American Revolution, George Washington requested his political masters buy up as much cinchona bark and quinine powder as possible, a deciding factor in the fate of the new nation, because in 1778, the Spanish crown restricted British access to quinine. In 1820, quinine was officially isolated, reducing the need for cinchona tree bark. That development opened the door of European exploration to all of Africa, considered at the time the white man's graveyard, due to how many Europeans died from malaria on the continent. In the 1860s, during the American Civil War, southern states relied heavily on shipping for goods, services, and medications. So Honest Abe Lincoln and his advisors enacted the Northern Blockade to block cotton shipments to Europe, weapons imports, and quinine. Lincoln's goal with blocking quinine was to create as many sick and dead Southern soldiers as possible, because a sick soldier slows down an army and drains resources. This ultimately means that Abraham Lincoln could be considered by some a practitioner of biological warfare against men and women, young and old, free and slave. Things were so desperate for the South that John Wilkes Booth, Lincoln's alleged assassin, smuggled quinine to friends and family. In their desperation, Southern doctors searched for native plants and trees local to the South to replace cinchona. The one that came up the most? The bark of a dogwood tree. When the information was provided to doctors across the South that they had a potential alternative, the doctors didn't use it because they felt it hadn't had enough clinical trials and didn't want to be considered homeopaths. Where have we heard that before?
The information that you're referring to specifically is anecdotal. It was not done in a controlled clinical trial, so you really can't make any definitive statement about it.
The role of quinine in war doesn't stop there. In the 1860s, malaria was a major issue for English soldiers in India, so soldiers began combining the bitter-tasting quinine with water and an alcoholic beverage to get their daily dose of the life-saving medicine. Thus, the gin and tonic was born. The medicinal beverage was so important to the crown that Winston Churchill stated,
"The gin and tonic drink has saved more Englishmen lives and minds than all the doctors in the empire."
With Africa opened up to exploration, European countries vied for colonies and power in Africa, creating rivalries that influenced World War I. By the 1930s, the primary locations for growing cinchona moved from South America to India and Indonesia, lands that would soon be cut off to the Allies. In World War II, the United States was desperate for a source of quinine and cinchona and returned to South America in a series of cinchona missions to build a supply chain and protect Allied troops. At the same time, Nazi scientists weaponized mosquitoes with malaria. The Nazis then conducted experiments on prisoners with these mosquitoes at Dachau concentration camp. Many of these prisoners were Jesuit priests. As World War II drew to a close, when United States and the United Kingdom troops advanced on Rome, the German troops cut window screens of all the homes in the region, confiscated quinine from the residents, and allegedly released their weaponized malaria-loaded mosquitoes. The advancing Allied troops were ready and protected with quinine, cinchona, and chloroquine, but the local population of Italians weren't so lucky. That year, there was a massive spike in civilian casualties from malaria, a parting gift from the fleeing Nazis. Hydroxychloroquine and drugs like it continued to be important over the years. For decades, American troops overseas have taken chloroquine, hydroxychloroquine, and other derivatives of those drugs. One of those derivatives, mefloquine, has been implicated in causing post-traumatic stress disorder and neurological issues with troops that were stationed in Iraq. The issues surrounding mefloquine are so great that the drug received a black box warning, the FDA's most stringent warning possible. For centuries now, the restriction of access to hydroxychloroquine, quinine, and drugs like them has been a standard tactic of warfare, It was involved in the Revolutionary War, the Civil War, World War I, World War II, countless smaller wars all across the planet, and most importantly, what one day may be remembered as World War III. We've spoken with numerous pharmacists, doctors, and academics, and very few of them knew the history of hydroxychloroquine and quinine. It makes you wonder, who's really in control of our scientific institutions? And what are we teaching our medical doctors?